There are weeks in a man's life that don't feel like weeks. They feel like entire lifetimes compressed into 7 days. Jim Kelly had one of those weeks, and he spent the rest of his life trying to explain what happened to him, knowing that no explanation would ever be enough. This is the story of what Bruce Lee did to Jim Kelly in 7 days, and why Jim Kelly said, publicly, on record more than once, that he walked in as one person and walked out as someone completely different. The man Jim Kelly was before. Let's be very clear about something first. Jim Kelly was not a beginner. He was not some eager student looking for a teacher. He was already a force. A middleweight karate champion. A man who had trained obsessively since his teenage years. Someone who had dedicated his entire existence to the mastery of his body. By the time he met Bruce Lee, Jim Kelly had already built a reputation that most fighters only dream about. Fast, explosive, unpredictable. He moved with a rhythm that was entirely his own, part athlete, part artist, part something that didn't have a name yet. He was confident, rightfully so, and that confidence, that beautiful, hard-earned confidence, is exactly what made the first morning so humbling. Because Jim Kelly walked into Bruce Lee's training space expecting to meet a peer. He did not meet a peer. Day 1, the moment the ground disappeared. The first thing Bruce Lee did was relaxed, loose, like a man waiting for a bus, not preparing for combat. And that relaxation, that complete, total absence of visible readiness, was the most unsettling thing Jim Kelly had ever seen in a training environment. Because Jim Kelly knew what readiness looked like. He had seen hundreds of fighters prepare. He knew the signs, the subtle shifts in weight, the narrowing of the eyes, the almost invisible tension that runs through a trained body before it moves. Bruce Lee had none of it. He just stood there, smiling slightly, and then he moved. Jim Kelly would later describe it as trying to catch smoke with your hands, not because Bruce Lee was fast, though he was faster than anything Jim Kelly had ever faced, but because the movement had no beginning, no telegraph, no warning signal that the human nervous system could detect and respond to. It was just absence, then presence, empty space, then contact. Jim Kelly stepped back, reassessed, tried again, same result. By the end of that first morning, Jim Kelly had one thought running on a loop in his mind. I have been doing this wrong. Everything, all of it, wrong. What Bruce Lee said on day 2. Bruce Lee started differently, training gear immediately. He sat down, poured tea, and started talking. Not about techniques, not about footwork or combinations or conditioning. He talked about water. He said, water has no shape. It takes the shape of whatever contains it. But water is also the most powerful force on Earth. It carved the Grand Canyon, not by being hard, by being completely, perfectly adaptable. Jim Kelly listened. He had heard philosophical ideas in martial arts before. Most teachers threw philosophy at you as decoration, pretty words around practical instruction. But something about the way Bruce Lee spoke made it clear this was not decoration. This was the instruction. He looked at Jim Kelly and said, "You are fighting like a rock. Powerful, impressive. But a rock cannot adapt. Water can. Water wins every time." Jim Kelly sat with that. And somewhere between the tea and the silence that followed, something started to shift. If you love Bruce Lee stories, subscribe. I post rare stories every day. The thing nobody teaches in any gym. Here is what Bruce Lee spent the rest of that week teaching Jim Kelly. And it is not what you think. He didn't teach him new kicks. He didn't give him secret combinations or revolutionary footwork patterns. He taught him something that no gym in America was teaching at the time. He taught him how to feel an opponent. Not see, not hear, feel. Bruce Lee believed, and demonstrated repeatedly, undeniably, that the highest level of combat is not about reacting to what an opponent does. It is about sensing what they are about to do before the intention becomes action. He called it the space between thought and movement. Every human being, no matter how trained, has a gap between the moment they decide to move and the moment they actually move. It is tiny, milliseconds, invisible to the untrained eye. Bruce Lee had spent years shrinking his own gap to almost nothing, and he had spent equal time learning to read that gap in others. He could feel when you were about to attack, not guess, not predict, feel. Like a current in the air that preceded the storm. He taught Jim Kelly to start feeling it too, and on day 4, in a moment that Jim Kelly described as almost spiritual, he felt it for the first time. Just a flicker, just a whisper of sensation before the attack came. But it was there, and once you feel something like that, you cannot unfeel it. The breaking point, day 5. Day 5 was when it broke Jim Kelly, not physically. Physically, he was in extraordinary shape. He could handle the physical demands. It broke him mentally. And that is a completely different kind of breaking. Bruce Lee had been pushing him, not hard, not aggressively, but consistently, to let go of his patterns, to stop trusting his memorized combinations and start trusting his instincts, to fight from a place of pure response rather than planned sequence. For a champion, this is terrifying, because your patterns are your identity. Your combinations are your name. The sequences you have drilled 10,000 times are the reason you have trophies, respect, students who look up to you. To let them go, even temporarily, even in a private training session, felt like erasing yourself. Jim Kelly sat down in the middle of a session and said he needed a minute. Bruce Lee sat down across from him, didn't rush him, didn't push, just waited. And then Jim Kelly said something that he admitted later felt almost embarrassing to say out loud. "I don't know who I am when I fight without my style." Bruce Lee looked at him for a long moment, then said, "Good, now we can begin." What happened on day 6? Day 6 was different from the first moment. Jim Kelly woke up and something had changed overnight. He couldn't explain it then. He couldn't fully explain it later either. But something in his body had processed what his mind had been resisting. He arrived at training, and Bruce Lee looked at him immediately and said nothing, just nodded, like he already knew. They trained for hours, and for the first time all week, Jim Kelly stopped trying, stopped planning, stopped reaching for the comfort of his familiar patterns. He just moved, and it was the best he had ever moved in his life. Bruce Lee pushed harder that day, testing, probing, looking for the edges of this new thing that was emerging in Jim Kelly. And every time he pushed, Jim Kelly found something he didn't know he had. Speed he hadn't accessed before, angles he had never used, responses that came from somewhere below conscious thought. At the end of the session, Bruce Lee said, "You just fought like water for the first time." Jim Kelly was breathing hard, sweat-soaked, exhausted in a way that felt completely different from physical exhaustion. He said, "I didn't feel like me." Bruce Lee smiled. "You felt like more than you. That's the point." If you love Bruce Lee stories, subscribe. I post rare stories every day. The last day. The conversation that never ended. Day. The last, more talking, more sitting. More of that thing Bruce Lee did where philosophy and instruction became the same thing and you couldn't separate them. Bruce Lee told Jim Kelly something that day that Jim carried for the rest of his life. He said, "Most people spend their whole life building a style, building a brand, building an identity, and then they spend the rest of their life defending it, protecting it, never growing because growing would mean admitting the thing they built isn't complete." He paused. The ones who become truly great are the ones who can build something and then be willing to burn it down. Not because it was wrong, but because they are ready for something bigger. Jim Kelly didn't say anything, because he understood, in a way that went beyond words, that Bruce Lee wasn't just talking about martial arts. He was talking about life. about the prisons we build for ourselves out of our own achievements, about the way success, if you let it, becomes the very thing that stops you from becoming who you could be. They shook hands at the end of that day. Jim Kelly said thank you. Bruce Lee told him he had nothing to thank him for, that everything Jim had found that week had always been inside him. "I just showed you the door," Bruce Lee said. "You walked through it. Enter the dragon." When the world saw what happened. Shortly after those 7 days, Bruce Lee cast Jim Kelly in Enter the Dragon, the most iconic martial arts film ever made. And if you watch Jim Kelly in that film, really watch him. Not just the action, but the way he carries himself, the way he inhabits his body, the way he moves through space. You can see something that wasn't there before. A fluidity, a presence, something that goes beyond technique. Critics noticed it. Audiences felt it even if they couldn't name it. Jim Kelly became a cultural phenomenon almost overnight. The film launched his career in a way that years of tournament victories had not. But Jim Kelly knew the truth. He knew that what people were responding to on screen was not his training, not his championships, not his years of drilling combinations until they were automatic. They were responding to 1 week, 7 days, a room with no audience, and a teacher who spoke in questions more than answers. They were responding to the moment he learned to fight like water. The climax. What Jim Kelly said decades later. Decades after Enter the Dragon. Decades after Bruce Lee was gone. A journalist asked Jim Kelly the question that journalists always ask people who knew Bruce Lee. What was he really like? Jim Kelly was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that isn't searching for words, but deciding which ones to use. Then he said, "Every teacher I ever had gave me something to add. A new technique, a new idea, a new piece to put in the collection." He paused. Bruce Lee was the only teacher who took things away, who helped me remove what was blocking me instead of piling on more. That is so rare. Most people, most great people, want to give you their system, their method, their way. Bruce wanted to help you find your own. Another pause, longer this time. He was the only person I ever met who made me feel like the goal was to need him less, not more. The journalist didn't speak, because there was nothing to add to that. The moral hit, the lesson that belongs to all of us. Here is what this story is really about. We live in a world that rewards accumulation. More skills, more credentials, more achievements stacked on top of each other like trophies on a shelf. And there is nothing wrong with that. Building things is good. Achieving things is good. But somewhere along the way, most of us stop asking the more dangerous question. What do I need to let go of? What pattern am I defending that used to serve me but now just makes me feel safe? What identity am I protecting that is actually the ceiling I keep hitting? Bruce Lee spent 1 week with Jim Kelly, not adding to him, but clearing away the debris that was blocking the best version of him. That is not a martial arts lesson. That is the most important thing any of us will ever learn. The question is not, what are you building? The question is, what are you ready to burn down?